The mahogany wood of the defense table was cold under my fingertips, a stark contrast to the boiling heat rising in my chest. Judge Harrison was already reaching for his final paperwork, his pen hovering over the documents that would legally dismantle my life. Across the aisle of the Fulton County courtroom, my soon-to-be ex-husband Marcus sat leaning back in his tailored charcoal suit. He was wearing that smile, the one that started slow at the corner of his mouth before reaching his dark, calculating eyes. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated triumph, and it made me physically sick to my stomach. Everyone in this room, the judge, the gallery, even my own fiercely protective attorney, believed the narrative Marcus had spent the last 2 years spinning. In less than 10 minutes, the court was going to award him half of my life's work. But to understand how a man could look at his wife with such cold, predatory satisfaction, you have to understand how the monster was built. You have to go back to the beginning, before the money, before the betrayal, and before the lies. My name is Maya Vance, but 7 years ago I was Maya Caldwell, and I didn't have tailored Prada suits or a corner office in Midtown Atlanta. I had a single second-hand freight truck with a rattling transmission, a folding table set up in the corner of my cramped apartment in Decatur, and an obsession with building something that no one could ever take away from me. The logistics and freight industry is a brutal, unforgiving boys' club. As a young African-American woman trying to break in, I wasn't just swimming with sharks. I was bleeding in the water. I worked 18-hour days. I cold-called shipping managers until my throat was raw, my voice cracking over the phone as I begged for just one overflow contract. I negotiated rates in dimly lit diners at 3 a.m, drinking burnt coffee and calculating profit margins on the back of paper napkins. Slowly, painfully, the business began to grow. 1 truck became 3. 3 became a small fleet. It was during this exhausting, exhilarating climb that I met Marcus Vance. We met at a Black Chamber of Commerce networking mixer in downtown Atlanta. I was exhausted, standing in the corner with a ginger ale trying to figure out how I was going to cover payroll that week. Marcus walked into the room like he owned the building. He was working in mid-level management at a commercial real estate firm, but he carried himself like a CEO. He was strikingly handsome, tall, broad-shouldered, with a perfectly lined beard and a smooth, effortless southern charm that made everyone in his orbit feel like they were the center of the universe. He locked eyes with me from across the room, excused himself from a conversation with 2 bank executives, and walked straight over. "You look like you're either going to take over the world or fall asleep standing up," he said, his voice deep and warm. That was the hook. Marcus was a master of the hook. He knew exactly how to disarm a fiercely independent woman. When we started dating, he didn't try to compete with my ambition. He masqueraded as my biggest champion. During my late-night dispatch shifts, when trucks would break down on I-95 and I was ready to pull my hair out, Marcus would show up at my apartment with takeout from my favorite Thai spot. He'd sit behind me, massaging the tension out of my shoulders while I yelled at mechanics over the phone. "You're a queen, Maya," he would whisper, kissing the top of my head. "You're building an empire. Let them doubt you. We know what you're capable of." That was the word that trapped me. I had spent my entire life feeling alone, and suddenly I had a partner. I thought I had found my equal. I thought we were a power couple in the making. We got married 2 years later in a beautiful ceremony in Savannah. I bought us a stunning modern estate in Buckhead. I thought my life was perfect. I couldn't have been more blind. The shift in Marcus didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, insidious poison that seeped into our marriage just as my company crossed the 7-figure revenue mark. When you are broke and struggling, a toxic partner will support you because they feel superior. But the moment you outgrow them, the moment your light shines brighter than theirs, they will do everything in their power to dim it. As my fleet expanded to cover the entire eastern seaboard, Marcus's real estate career remained completely stagnant. He hated his boss. He hated his commute. But most of all, he hated that his wife was the one funding our lifestyle. His supportive comments started growing teeth. At first, it was subtle digs disguised as concern. "Maya, you're wearing that suit to the gala?" he asked one evening as we were getting ready for a charity dinner. He leaned against the doorframe, swirling a glass of bourbon, looking me up and down with a hint of disgust. "It's so masculine. You're a beautiful woman. You don't always have to dress like you're trying to intimidate the men in the room. It makes you look insecure." I froze, adjusting my lapel. I had paid $2,000 for that custom tailoring. I changed into a dress that night, shrinking myself just a little bit to make him comfortable. Then came the complaints about my hours. If my phone buzzed during dinner, he wouldn't just sigh, he would slam his fork down, stand up, and leave the room without a word, leaving me sitting alone at a dining table big enough for 10. If I talked excitedly about expanding our distribution channels to the West Coast, he would roll his eyes, pour another drink, and say, "Is it ever enough for you? Or is this relentless greed just a cover for something broken inside you?" Oh! Every argument we had ended the exact same way. He would look at me with this cold, empty stare, a stare that made me feel entirely worthless, and tell me that my ambition was ruining our marriage. He convinced me that I was a neglectful, obsessive, emotionally unavailable wife. I was so deeply manipulated that I actually believed him. I thought I was the problem. I tried desperately to bridge the widening gap between us. I turned down massive networking opportunities to stay home and cook his favorite meals. I bought him expensive watches, Rolexes, EPs, hoping they would make him feel like the king he so desperately wanted to be. I leased him a $100,000 Mercedes-AMG, putting it entirely in my name but handing him the keys with a smile. I thought I could buy back the man I had fallen in love with. But you cannot buy respect from a man who resents your very existence. And you certainly cannot buy loyalty. As my company reached new heights, pulling in multi-million-dollar government contracts, Marcus began to quietly unravel my sanity. He started isolating me. If I wanted to invite my sorority sisters over, he would complain about a migraine. If my family wanted to visit, he would pick a massive fight the night before, so the energy in the house was toxic by the time they arrived. Eventually, people just stopped coming around. Then came the red flags. I was simply too exhausted to acknowledge. It started with his phone. For the first 3 years of our marriage, we knew each other's passcodes. It was never a big deal, but suddenly his phone was permanently locked. When I asked him to pull up a recipe while my hands were covered in flour, he snatched the phone away from me, his eyes wide with an aggressive panic. "Corporate security updates," he snapped, slipping it into his pocket. "My firm mandates strict confidentiality now. You can't just be grabbing my device." I let it go. I was too tired from running a company to fight over a cell phone policy. Then came the late-night texts. His phone would light up at 1 a.m., vibrating against the nightstand. When I asked who was texting him at that hour, he wouldn't even look up from his pillow. "It's just the fraternity group chat, Maya. The guys are arguing about the Falcons game. Go to sleep." But the biggest red flag, the one that eventually shattered my entire reality, was the sudden, inexplicable business trips. Marcus worked in commercial real estate in Atlanta. He had absolutely no clients outside of Georgia. Yet suddenly he needed to take site assessment trips to Miami, to Houston, to Los Angeles. "The firm is expanding," he told me smoothly, packing a sleek designer duffel bag I had bought him for his birthday. "They want me spearheading the out-of-state acquisitions. It's a huge promotion, Maya. I thought you'd be happy for me." I wanted to be happy for him. I really did. But the math wasn't making sense. When I asked to celebrate his promotion, he brushed it off, claiming it wasn't official on paper yet. When I offered to fly out and meet him in Miami for the weekend, he told me it would be wildly unprofessional to have his wife hovering around while he was trying to close deals. I was drowning in my own company's expansion, so I buried my intuition. I chose to trust him. Because if I couldn't trust my husband, I had nothing left to hold on to. The illusion finally shattered on a mundane, rainy Tuesday morning in late October. It wasn't a grand, cinematic confrontation. I didn't hire a private investigator. I didn't follow him to a shady motel. It was completely accidental. Marcus was in the shower. I was rushing around our bedroom, gathering up his dry cleaning for my assistant to drop off later. I picked up his favorite Tom Ford blazer, a deep navy wool jacket he had worn over the weekend. He had told me he was driving 3 hours down to Savannah to help his elderly aunt fix a leak in her roof. He had complained about how grueling the manual labor was going to be. As I folded the blazer over my arm, my fingers brushed against a stiffness deep in the inner breast pocket. I reached inside, expecting to find a forgotten business card or a dry cleaning tag. Instead, I pulled out a crumpled piece of thick, high-quality thermal paper. It was a restaurant receipt. I smoothed it out on the pristine white duvet of our bed. The logo at the top belonged to the Sovereign, an ultra-exclusive, impossibly expensive steakhouse right here in Buckhead. My heart did a strange, painful flutter. He was supposed to be in Savannah. I looked at the date printed in the top right corner. It was Saturday night. The exact night he texted me complaining about how tired he was from hauling shingles onto his aunt's roof. My hands began to tremble as I read down the itemized list. 2 Wagyu ribeyes, 2 sides of truffle mac and cheese, 2 dozen oysters, 1 bottle of Opus, 1 Cabernet Sauvignon, $800. The total for the dinner alone was over $1,200, but that wasn't the detail that made the air leave my lungs. That wasn't the detail that forced me to sit down heavily on the edge of the bed, the room spinning violently around me. At the very bottom of the receipt, right beneath the tip line, was a secondary charge. Room service and valet transfer to the St. Regis. The restaurant was attached to one of the most luxurious hotels in the city. He hadn't just taken someone to an extravagant dinner. He had transferred the bill to their room. I sat there in the quiet of my massive, beautiful bedroom, listening to the sound of the shower running in the master bath. The man I had defended, the man I had funded, the man I had shrunk myself to protect, was sleeping with another woman 10 minutes away from our house while I was up until 2 a.m. finalizing shipping routes to pay our mortgage. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute that it bypassed sorrow completely and went straight to a cold, terrifying numbness. 10 minutes later, the bathroom door clicked open. Marcus walked out, a towel wrapped around his waist, water dripping from his chest. He was humming a Randazi song, looking completely relaxed. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me sitting on the edge of the bed. I didn't say a word. I just raised my hand and held up the smoothed-out receipt. For a fraction of a second, I saw his eyes dart to the paper and I saw the recognition flash across his face. I expected panic. I expected him to rush forward, to drop to his knees, to start weaving an intricate, desperate lie. I expected him to beg. Instead, Marcus Vance did something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. He looked at the receipt. He looked at my pale, devastated face, and he smiled. It wasn't a nervous smile. It was a cold, arrogant, utterly dead-eyed smirk. He walked over to his dresser, picked up his gold watch, and slowly strapped it onto his wrist. "Maya," he said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "If I wanted a woman who actually acted like a wife, I could have better." "You're barely a woman anymore. You're just a machine. Did you really think a man like me was going to sit around forever while you played boss?" He didn't wait for my response. He walked into his massive walk-in closet, pulled out a suitcase, and started packing. 3 weeks later, I was served with divorce papers. I thought the worst was over. I thought that discovering the affair was the climax of my pain. I believed that we would divide our assets, sign the papers, and go our separate ways, allowing me to heal in peace. I was so incredibly naive. Leaving me wasn't enough for Marcus. He didn't just want out of the marriage. He wanted a crucifixion. He wanted to destroy the very empire he had watched me build, simply because his ego couldn't handle the fact that I was the king, and he was just a dependent. And as the ink dried on the initial divorce filings, the most vicious, calculated, and devastating smear campaign Atlanta's corporate world had ever seen was about to begin. The silence of a 10,000-square-foot house when you are entirely alone is a heavy, suffocating thing. In the days following Marcus's departure, the Buckhead estate didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. It felt like a mausoleum. I spent the first week operating in a state of clinical shock. I woke up at 4 a.m., drove to the dispatch center, negotiated freight rates, managed my drivers, and came home to an empty house. I thought if I just kept my head down and focused on the logistics company, the emotional bleeding would eventually stop. I believed that Marcus, having secured his freedom, and the younger woman he had been hiding in luxury hotel rooms, would simply want a quiet, fast divorce. I severely underestimated the depth of his malice. The first blow didn't come in a courtroom. It came in the form of a thick manila envelope, delivered to my corporate office by a smirking process server in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. My assistant, a sweet, sharp girl named Kira, brought it into my office with a trembling hand. I sliced the envelope open with a letter opener, expecting standard dissolution papers. Instead, I pulled out a 70-page petition for divorce that read like a masterclass in fiction. As I scanned the pages, the air physically left my lungs. Marcus wasn't just asking for half of the liquid assets in our joint accounts. He was petitioning the court for 50% ownership of Caldwell Logistics. He was demanding permanent spousal support, claiming he had sacrificed his own earning potential to act as an unpaid advisor to my business. He demanded exclusive possession of the Buckhead estate, and worst of all, he filled a blisteringly cruel affidavit accusing me of severe emotional and financial abuse. He claimed I had systematically isolated him from his family. Claimed I controlled every dollar he spent, forcing him to beg for basic necessities. He painted a picture of a terrified, emotionally battered husband desperately trying to survive under the thumb of a ruthless, narcissistic corporate wife. It was entirely fabricated. I had bought the man a $100,000 AMG and funded his entire life. But reading those words stamped with the seal of the Fulton County Superior Court, I felt a cold terror wash over me. Marcus wasn't trying to leave me, he was trying to erase me. Before I could even formulate a legal defense, the social assassination began. Atlanta is a massive city, but the circle of high-net-worth African-American professionals is incredibly tight-knit. Everyone knows everyone. We all attended the same galas, sat on the same charity boards, and drank at the same exclusive country clubs. Marcus weaponized his charisma, launching a preemptive strike on my reputation. While I was locked in my office trying to keep my fleet of trucks moving, he was sitting in the living rooms of our mutual friends, pouring them glasses of expensive wine and crying. He played the victim with terrifying perfection. He told them the marriage had broken him. He told them I was a monster behind closed doors. The effects were immediate and devastating. Women who had been bridesmaids in my wedding suddenly stopped returning my texts. Invitations to social events dried up. When I did force myself to attend a Black Chamber of Commerce dinner, the moment I walked into the ballroom, the conversations around me dropped to a hush. People I had known for years suddenly found reasons to look away, whispering behind their cocktail glasses. I managed to corner an old friend, a corporate lawyer named Denise, near the coat check. "Denise," I said, my voice tight. "What is going on? Why is everyone looking at me like I have a disease?" Denise looked deeply uncomfortable. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Maya, Marcus came by the house last week. He was a wreck. He told us about the hidden accounts. He told us how you froze his credit cards and told him he was worthless." "Denise, that is a lie," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "He was cheating on me. I found a receipt from the St. Regis. He's been living a double life." Denise offered a pitying, tight-lipped smile. "He warned us you would say that. He said you would invent an affair to cover up the financial abuse. Look, Maya, we just don't want to get in the middle of this. It's toxic." She walked away, leaving me standing alone in a crowded room. That was the moment I realized the true genius of Marcus's plan. By accusing me of being a manipulator, he had effectively immunized himself against the truth. Any defense I offered just made me look exactly like the crazy, controlling woman he claimed I was. But the whispers at country clubs were nothing compared to the damage he was about to inflict on my empire. In the logistics and freight industry, reputation is your only true currency. Corporate clients don't hand over multi-million-dollar supply chain contracts to unstable leaders. They need reliability. They need ironclad trust. 3 months into the divorce proceedings, the rumors bled from the social scene into the boardroom. Marcus had intentionally leaked his court filings to a prominent Atlanta business blog under the guise of an anonymous source. The headline read "Logistics Queen or Corporate Tyrant? L. The Messy Divorce Threatening Caldwell Freight." 2 days after the article dropped, I was summoned to an emergency meeting with the board of directors for my largest client, a massive retail distributor based in the Midwest. I had spent 8 grueling months negotiating a renewed, expanded contract with them, a contract worth nearly $700,000 in projected annual revenue. It was the deal that was going to fund my expansion to the West Coast. I sat at the head of the long glass conference table, my legal pad in front of me, projecting complete confidence. But the 6 executives staring back at me looked incredibly grim. "Maya," the lead director, a stern, older man named Robert, began slowly, "we have always valued our partnership with Caldwell Logistics. Your fulfillment rates are exceptional. But the board has serious concerns regarding the current volatility of your leadership." "Robert," I said smoothly, folding my hands, "I assure you my personal life has absolutely zero bearing on my company's operational capacity. We have added 10 new trucks to the fleet this quarter alone." "It's not about the trucks," Robert interrupted, sliding a printed copy of the blog article across the glass table. "It's about liability. We are a publicly traded company. Your husband is legally claiming he owns 50% of your firm, and he is alleging severe financial impropriety on your part. If this goes to a protracted trial, or worse, if a judge awards him controlling shares, we cannot guarantee the stability of our supply chain. We cannot have our distribution network tied up in a messy family court dispute." "He has no claim to this company," I fired back, my professional facade slipping as desperation clawed at my throat. "I built this from nothing before I even met him." "We can't take that risk," Robert said softly, closing his folder. "We are invoking the morals and stability clause in our current agreement. We are pulling the expansion contract, and we will be transitioning to a different carrier at the end of the month." I lost $700,000 in a single 20-minute meeting. I walked out of that skyscraper, got into the back of my town car, and for the first time since Marcus left, I broke down. I sobbed until my ribs ached. I had given that man everything, and he was successfully burning my entire world to ash. To twist the knife even deeper, Marcus took his new life entirely public. With half of our liquid assets temporarily frozen in escrow by the court, I was forced to take out high-interest business loans just to make payroll for my drivers. Meanwhile, Marcus was treating the frozen marital assets like a guaranteed lottery ticket. He went official with the woman he had been hiding. Her name was Chloe. Chloe was 25, stunningly beautiful, and relentlessly ambitious in the worst possible way. She was an aspiring social media influencer whose entire brand revolved around luxury, soft life aesthetics, and dating high-net-worth men. To Marcus, she was the ultimate trophy. She was a walking, talking advertisement to the city of Atlanta that he had upgraded, that he had survived the evil Maya and found a submissive feminine prize. Her Instagram feed became an instrument of psychological torture. Almost daily I would sit in my office, drowning in legal bills, watching them live out loud. There were photos of them on private jets heading to Cabo, the caption reading, "When a real man finally finds his peace. #healing journey." There were videos of Chloe unboxing $20,000 Birkin bags, sitting on the hood of the Mercedes AMG that was still legally in my name, with the caption, "Spoiled by the best. Escaped the toxic and found the divine." It was a masterclass in gaslighting. Everyone in the city was congratulating him on his newfound happiness, completely oblivious to the fact that my blood, my sweat, and my 18-hour workdays were indirectly funding every single flight, every steak dinner, and every designer purse. Marcus was intentionally running up massive amounts of debt, confident that the judge would force me to pay it off during the final asset division. He thought he was untouchable. He thought I was broken. And honestly, for a little while he was right. 8 months before our final hearing, I hit absolute rock bottom. I was sitting at the massive marble kitchen island in my empty house at midnight. The only light came from the blue glow of my laptop screen. I was reviewing the latest invoice from my divorce attorney, Diane. The legal fees were bleeding me completely dry. My company's growth had completely stalled. The whispers in the industry were suffocating. I looked at a framed photo on the wall that I hadn't gotten around to taking down yet. It was from our wedding day. Marcus was smiling, looking at me like I hung the moon. I picked up a heavy crystal whiskey glass from the counter, and with every ounce of rage and sorrow in my body, I hurled it across the kitchen. It shattered against the wall, sending shards of glass raining down onto the hardwood floor. I sank to my knees, burying my face in my hands. I was ready to surrender. I was ready to call my lawyer in the morning, offer him the 50% he wanted, and just walk away to save whatever was left of my sanity. Then my phone buzzed on the granite counter. The vibration was loud in the dead silence of the kitchen. I wiped my eyes and pulled myself up. I glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number, displaying an Atlanta area code. Normally, I would have ignored it, but exhaustion makes you reckless. I swiped the green icon and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello," I said, my voice thick and raspy. "Maya Vance?" the voice on the other end said. It was a man's voice. It wasn't the fast, slick cadence of the logistics brokers I was used to dealing with. This voice was deep, resonant, and carried the unmistakable weight of old, established power. "Speaking," I replied, frowning. "Who is this?" "My name is Julian Hayes," the man said. The name hit me like a physical blow. The haze of exhaustion instantly vanished. I knew exactly who Julian Hayes was. Every business owner in Atlanta knew who he was. He was a ruthless, notoriously private venture capitalist who controlled half the commercial tech development in the city. He ran in circles so elite that Marcus had spent our entire marriage desperately trying to get an invitation to his charity galas, only to be rejected every time. But more importantly, Julian Hayes was the man Chloe had been publicly attached to right before she suddenly appeared on Marcus's arm. My grip on the phone tightened. The air in the kitchen felt suddenly electric. "I know who you are, Mr. Hayes, but I failed to see what we have to discuss. If this is about your ex-girlfriend and my husband, I am not interested in high school drama. I have a company to run." I went to pull the phone away from my ear, ready to end the call. "Don't hang up," Julian commanded. He didn't raise his voice, but the sheer authority in his tone froze my hand in midair. "You need to listen to me, Maya. I'm not calling you about a broken heart. I don't give a damn about Chloe. She's a parasite. But I do care about arrogance, and your husband has made the fatal mistake of bringing his arrogance into my house." I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. "What are you talking about?" "I know what Marcus is doing to Caldwell Logistics," Julian said, voice dropping to a low, deadly timbre. "I know about the smear campaign. I know about the Midwest contract you just lost, and I know the endgame he thinks he has lined up." "How could you possibly know any of that?" I breathed. "Because Chloe didn't leave me for Marcus Vaidisnawev, Maya," Julian scoffed, a dark amusement threading through his words. "She left me because I made her sign an ironclad non-disclosure agreement and flat-out refused to give her access to my primary accounts. Marcus, however, is a very stupid man. He fed her a very different story. He convinced her that he was the secret genius behind your logistics empire." Julian paused, letting the weight of his next words hang in the air. "He promised her that he was going to walk away from the divorce with 50% of your shares. But he doesn't want to run the trucks, Maya. He intends to use the settlement to gain legal ownership and then immediately force a hostile sale of his half to your biggest rival, Apex Logistics, at a massive discount. He isn't trying to win the divorce, he is trying to completely bankrupt you." I squeezed my eyes shut, the sheer calculated malice of the plan making my blood run cold. Apex was my fiercest competitor. If Marcus sold half my fleet and my routes to them, they would swallow me whole. I would lose everything. "Why are you telling me this, Julian?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and desperate hope. "You owe me nothing." Because Chloe is playing a dangerous game, Julian said sharply. She's been secretly calling me from burner phones for the last 6 months, begging me to keep a door open for her in case Marcus loses the trial and the money dries up. She bragged to me about their entire strategy to destroy you. She thinks she's untouchable. She thinks she outsmarted me. Hearsay from a burner phone won't save me in family court, I whispered, the hope draining out of me. Marcus has the judge entirely convinced I'm a financial predator. If I go into court and say a venture capitalist heard a rumor from an Instagram model, the judge will sanction me. I don't deal in rumors, Maya, Julian said, a cold, ruthless satisfaction creeping into his voice. I deal in leverage, and right now I have the Holy Grail. The silence on the line stretched out for a full 5 seconds. I could hear the faint sound of classical music playing in the background of Julian's end. I host a highly secure private networking gala at my estate every spring, Julian finally continued. Chloe convinced Marcus to crash it 3 months ago. She wanted to parade him in front of my circle to make me jealous. They drank too much Macallan. They got arrogant. They walked out onto my private veranda to smoke cigars with a few investors. Julian's voice dropped to a whisper. What Marcus didn't know, Maya, is that my veranda is where I conduct high-level corporate negotiations. For security reasons, the entire space is wired with hidden high-definition audio. The kitchen started to spin. I grabbed the edge of the marble island to steady myself. You have him on tape? I don't just have him on tape, Julian said. I have him completely unedited, crystal clear, and completely unfiltered. He was bragging, Maya. He laid out the entire conspiracy. He laughed about fabricating the abuse allegations. He detailed the backdoor deal with Apex. He admitted on tape that he was going to bankrupt you just for fun. Tears, hot and fast, suddenly spiked in my eyes. It wasn't sorrow this time. It was the intoxicating, overwhelming rush of pure vindication. I'm emailing the encrypted audio file to your attorney's private server as we speak, Julian said. Take this, Maya. Go into that courtroom and burn that miserable coward to the ground. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the faint electrical hum of the refrigerator. I stood frozen by the marble island, the phone still clutched in my hand long after Julian Hayes had disconnected the call. My heart was beating so violently against my ribs that it physically ached. For the first time in 8 months, the crushing, suffocating weight of Marcus's psychological warfare vanished, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the glowing screen of my laptop, watching my encrypted email inbox. Refresh, nothing? Nothing? I paced the length of the kitchen, the shattered crystal from the whiskey glass crunching beneath my bare feet. I didn't care. I couldn't feel it. My entire existence was narrowed down to the digital inbox on that screen. Julian Hayes was a man of his word, a ruthless billionaire who didn't play games with his time or his enemies. If he said he was sending the file, it was coming. At 1:14 a.m., the notification chimed. An email from a secure anonymous server appeared at the top of my inbox. The subject line was blank. There was no message in the body. There was only a single heavy audio file attached. Audio Veranda 0412. WAV. My hands shook so badly I could barely guide the cursor over the trackpad. I clicked download. I grabbed my noise-canceling headphones, plugged them in, and slipped them over my ears. I needed to hear every single syllable. I needed to know exactly what the man I had married was truly capable of. I pressed play. For the first 10 seconds, there was only the ambient noise of wealth. The soft clinking of crystal tumblers, the strike of a match, the faint thumping bass of a jazz band playing somewhere inside the mansion, and the low murmur of men discussing golf and profit margins. Then, cutting through the background noise with sickening clarity, came Marcus's voice. I'm telling you, it's a lock. She has absolutely no idea. Marcus laughed. It was that deep, arrogant chuckle I used to find so charming. Now it sounded like a venomous snake sliding across dry leaves. Another voice spoke, a man I didn't recognize. You're playing a dangerous game, Vance. Maya built Caldwell Logistics from the dirt up. I've dealt with her brokers. She's a barracuda. If she catches wind that you've been talking to Apex executives before the divorce is finalized, she will bury you in litigation. Let her try, Marcus scoffed, the sound of him taking a sip of liquor echoing through the microphone. By the time my lawyers are done with her, she won't have the capital to fight a parking ticket, let alone a corporate injunction. You have to understand the psychology, man. I filed an affidavit claiming severe financial and emotional abuse. I painted her as a complete tyrant. In family court, whoever controls the narrative controls the assets. The judge is already treating her like a hostile witness. There was a pause, followed by the sound of a woman giggling. Chloe! Baby, tell him about the escrow trap, Chloe coaxed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Oh, that's the best part, Marcus bragged, his words slurring just slightly from the expensive Macallan. I got the judge to freeze all of her liquid capital. She can't access the corporate expansion funds. She's bleeding out paying her daily operational costs. Within 6 months, her valuation is going to plummet. When the judge finally awards me my 50% stake for my years of unpaid contributions to the marriage, the shares will be devalued. I've already got a handshake agreement with the CEO of Apex Logistics. I'm dumping my 50% to them the second the ink dries. They force a hostile takeover, absorb her feed, and I walk away with $8 million in cash. The unrecognized man whistled softly. That is brutal, Marcus. You're going to bankrupt her. Bankrupt her? Marcus laughed, a cold, soulless sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I'm going to ruin her. She needs to learn her place. For 5 years she walked around that house acting like she was the king, treating me like some kind of dependent just because I didn't want to run myself ragged in the mud. She embarrassed me. Now I'm going to take the very thing she loves most, sell it to her worst enemy, and watch her work a desk job for the rest of her miserable life. And I'm going to do it all with her money. The recording clicked, hissed, and went silent. I slowly pulled the headphones off my ears. The silence of the kitchen rushed back in. I didn't cry. The time for crying was over. A deep, freezing calm washed over my entire body. It was the kind of calm that comes when you finally realize you aren't fighting a misguided ex-husband. You are fighting a predator who wants you dead. Marcus didn't just want a divorce. He wanted a public execution. I unplugged my laptop, shoved it into my leather briefcase, and went upstairs to shower. I scrubbed my skin until it was red. I put on a sharp, charcoal gray tailored suit, the exact kind of suit Marcus used to mock for being too masculine. I applied my makeup with military precision. I slid my Rolex onto my wrist. At 6 a.m., I was sitting in the parking lot of my attorney's office building in downtown Atlanta. Diane arrived at 6:30 a.m., carrying a tray of black coffees. She was a 60-year-old legal shark with silver hair cut into a sharp bob, known throughout Fulton County for her ruthless efficiency. When she saw me sitting on the hood of my car in the dawn light, she paused. Maya? Diane asked, her brow furrowing. Our settlement strategy meeting isn't until Thursday. What are you doing here? We aren't settling, Diane, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I grabbed my briefcase and walked toward the glass doors of the lobby. Unlock the office. I have something you need to hear. 10 minutes later, we were sitting in Diane's sprawling corner office overlooking the city skyline. I placed my laptop on her mahogany desk, pulled up the audio file, and turned the volume all the way up. Listen, I commanded. Diane leaned back in her leather chair, her arms crossed, her expression guarded. As the audio began to play, I watched her face. Diane had practiced high-asset divorce law for 30 years. She had seen every iteration of human greed, betrayal, and malice. Very little shocked her. But as Marcus's voice filled the room bragging about perjury, detailing the corporate conspiracy with Apex Logistics, and laughing about the fabricated abuse allegations, Diane's posture completely changed. She leaned forward, her eyes widening behind her designer glasses. By the time the recording ended, her jaw was tightly clenched. The room fell silent. Diane stared at the laptop screen for a long, agonizing minute. Maya, Diane whispered, her voice rough. Where did you get this? An anonymous source, I lied smoothly. Julian Hayes had been explicitly clear that his name was never to be mentioned. It was sent to a secure server. The metadata is attached. It was recorded 3 months ago at a private function in Buckhead. Diane reached out and touched the keyboard, her manicured fingernail tapping against the spacebar. A slow, predatory smile began to spread across her face. It was the most terrifying and beautiful thing I had ever seen. Do you understand what you possess right here? Diane asked, looking up at me. This isn't just a smoking gun, Maya. This is a nuclear warhead. He's explicitly detailing a conspiracy to commit corporate fraud, perjury, and malicious prosecution. This is criminal. Can we use it? I asked, my heart pounding. Is it admissible? Georgia is a one-party consent state for recording, but neither of the parties involved knew they were being recorded by the homeowner. It falls under the whistleblower exemption if it details an active, ongoing criminal conspiracy involving significant financial fraud, which this absolutely does, Diane said, her mind already spinning with legal precedents. A judge will admit this in chambers under seal, but we cannot use it right now. I frowned, the frustration flaring hot in my chest. What do you mean we can't use it? Al, I want to march into the courthouse today and play it on a loudspeaker. He is bleeding my company dry, Diane. I lost the Midwest contract because of his lies. And if we play it today, his lawyers will claim it's a deepfake or AI generated, or edited out of context, Diane snapped, raising a hand to silence me. They will tie us up in forensic audio authentication for another year, and you will go bankrupt paying for it. No, Maya. If you want to destroy him, you have to let him dig the grave so deep that he can never climb out. She turned the laptop toward her and hit replay, listening to Marcus's drunken laughter one more time. We are entering the deposition phase next week, Diane continued, her eyes gleaming with a ruthless intelligence. He's going to sit across from us in a conference room, under oath, with a court reporter typing every single word he says. I'm going to ask him extremely specific, pointed questions about his finances. I'm going to ask him under oath if he's ever fabricated any of the abuse allegations. I'm going to ask him on the legal record if he has had any contact with Apex Logistics. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized what she was proposing. You want him to perjure himself on the record. I want him to lie so aggressively and so comprehensively that when we finally spring this recording at the final hearing, it won't just be an audio clip against his word. It will be an audio clip proving that he systematically lied under oath for hours, Diane said, slamming her hand down flat on the desk. We let him think he's winning. We let him act arrogant. You have to walk into that deposition looking defeated, Maya. You have to let him think he broke you. Can you do that? I thought about the empty house. I thought about the sheer terror I had felt watching my freight trucks sit idle because clients were pulling their contracts. I thought about the smug smile he wore when I found the St. Regis receipt. I can play the victim, I said softly. I've been practicing for 5 years. The next week was an exercise in supreme psychological endurance. While I secretly held the weapon that would eventually end his life as he knew it, my daily reality was still a waking nightmare. The financial strangulation Marcus had bragged about on the tape was very real. Because my assets were frozen, I was forced to take out a high-interest, predatory commercial loan just to cover the diesel fuel for my trucks. My assistant, Kiera, walked into my office on a Tuesday afternoon, holding a stack of past-due vendor invoices. Her eyes were red and she looked exhausted. Miss Vance, she said hesitantly, setting the papers on my desk. The tire supplier is threatening to halt our account. We're 60 days behind. And 3 of our senior dispatchers just put in their notice. The rumors about the Apex takeover are spreading through the warehouse. People think we're going under. I looked at Kira, a young, brilliant black woman who had been with me since I only had 3 trucks. She was terrified for her job. I wanted so badly to tell her the truth. I wanted to pull her into my office, lock the door, and tell her that we had the winning lottery ticket sitting in Diane's encrypted vault. But I couldn't risk a leak. "Let the dispatchers go," I said smoothly, signing the top invoice with a steady hand. "Tell the tire supplier I am personally authorizing a wire transfer from my emergency operational fund by Friday. We are not going under, Kiera, I promise you." She nodded, though she didn't look convinced, and quietly left the office. 2 days later, the real test began, the deposition. It took place in the conference room of Marcus's attorney's firm, a massive glass-walled office in the heart of Buckhead. I walked in wearing a plain, slightly wrinkled blouse and minimal makeup. I intentionally made myself look exhausted. I kept my shoulders slumped. I let the dark circles under my eyes show. Marcus was already sitting at the long mahogany table. He looked like a king holding court. He was wearing a bespoke navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and the gold Rolex I had bought him for our 3rd anniversary. When I walked in, he didn't even try to hide his smirk. He leaned back in his leather chair and took a slow sip of sparkling water. Diane sat beside me, organizing her legal pads with terrifying calm. Across from us, Marcus's attorney, a loud, aggressive bulldog of a man named Richard, clicked his pen, ready to begin. The court reporter swore Marcus in. "Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" "I do," Marcus said smoothly, his eyes locked onto mine. For the first 2 hours, Richard aggressively questioned me, trying to trip me up on company valuations and asset management. I played my part perfectly. I answered quietly. I let my voice shake slightly when discussing the frozen funds. I looked down at my hands. Every time I acted defeated, Marcus's chest puffed out a little further. Then it was Diane's turn. Diane didn't yell. She didn't badger him. She was surgical. She started with the abuse allegations. "Mr. Vance," Diane said, peering at him over her glasses. "In your initial affidavit, you claimed that my client, Maya Vance, forcefully isolated you from your family and strictly controlled your finances, causing you severe emotional distress. Is that correct?" "Yes," Marcus said softly, putting on a masterful performance of a wounded, traumatized man. She was deeply controlling. I had to ask permission to buy a cup of coffee. I was a prisoner in that house." Diane didn't blink. She made a small check mark on her legal pad. "I see. And you stand by those statements today under penalty of perjury? You never exaggerated or fabricated these claims to gain leverage in this proceeding?" "Leverage in this proceeding?" Marcus looked mildly offended. "I would never lie about something so traumatic. Every word is true." Under the table, my fingernails dug so hard into my palms that they drew blood. I could hear his drunken laughter echoing in my mind. I painted her as a complete tyrant. In family court, whoever controls the narrative controls the assets. Diane moved on, smoothly, effortlessly. "Now, regarding Caldwell Logistics," Diane said, flipping to a new page. "You are seeking a 50% stake in the company. What are your intentions if the court awards you these shares? You do plan to take an active operational role?" Marcus cleared his throat, sitting up straighter. "I have significant corporate experience. I plan to act as a silent partner and board member, collecting my rightful share of the dividends from the business I helped build behind the scenes." "So, you have no intention of liquidating those shares?" Diane asked, her voice light, almost conversational. "None whatsoever," Marcus lied, his face an unmoving mask of sincerity. "I want the company to thrive." Diane leaned forward just a fraction of an inch. "Mr. Vance, have you had any communications, either written, verbal, or through a third-party intermediary, with any executive or representative of Apex Logistics regarding the sale of Caldwell Logistics shares?" For a microsecond, just a fraction of a heartbeat, Marcus's eyes twitched. It was the only sign of panic he showed. He glanced at his lawyer, Richard, who looked completely bored, unaware of the trap being laid. Marcus looked back at Diane. His face smoothed out. He smiled. "No," Marcus said clearly, his voice echoing in the quiet conference room. I have never spoken to anyone at Apex Logistics. That would be completely inappropriate. Diane stared at him for a long, heavy moment. She didn't smile. She didn't react. She simply made one final heavy checkmark on her legal pad with her red pen. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," Diane said, closing her folder. "I have no further questions." The deposition ended. As we packed up our briefcases, Marcus stood up, buttoning his tailored jacket. He walked around the table and stopped just inches from me. "You look tired, Maya," he said quietly, so only I could hear. The false victimhood was gone, replaced by pure, arrogant malice. "You should probably get some rest. It's going to be a long fall to the bottom." I looked up at him. I looked into the eyes of the man who had slept in my bed, eaten my food, driven my cars, and plotted my complete destruction. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt nothing but a cold, clinical anticipation. "Enjoy the watch, Marcus," I said softly, stepping around him. "Make sure you keep track of the time." 3 months later, the morning of the final court hearing arrived. The sky over Atlanta was a bruised, heavy purple, threatening a massive thunderstorm. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my bedroom. I wasn't wearing a wrinkled blouse today. I was wearing a stark white, impeccably tailored power suit. It was aggressive. It was flawless. It was the armor of a woman going to war. Caldwell Logistics was on the verge of total collapse. The Apex rumors had driven away 2 more clients. My bank accounts were overdrawn. Marcus had successfully bled me to the absolute edge of ruin. But as I walked out of the house and got into the back of my town car heading toward the Fulton County Courthouse, I wasn't afraid. The trap was fully set. The rope was tied. Marcus had spent 8 hours under oath meticulously lying about everything Julian Hayes had recorded him admitting to. He had built a massive, fragile house of cards, and today, in front of a furious Superior Court judge, I was going to be the hurricane that blew it all down. I pulled my phone out and sent a single text message to Diane. "Burn him." The heavy oak doors of the Fulton County Superior Court courtroom felt like the gates to another dimension. As I pushed them open, the muffled murmur of the hallway vanished, replaced by the sterile, echoing quiet of a room designed to dismantle lives. The gallery was surprisingly full. In high-asset divorce cases, proceedings were technically public but rarely attended. Today, however, was different. Marcus had made sure of that. Sitting in the wooden pews behind the defense table were 6 people from our former social circle, women who had been in my bridal party, men who had eaten steaks at my dining table. They were all sitting behind Marcus, whispering among themselves, casting pitiful, condescending glances in my direction. They'd come to watch the ruthless corporate tyrant finally get stripped of her kingdom. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes locked straight ahead, my white tailored suit a beacon of absolute defiance in a sea of drab courtroom gray. Diane was already at the plaintiff's table, meticulously laying out manila folders in perfect alignment. She didn't look up when I took the seat next to her, but she slid a single sheet of paper toward me. It was the deposition transcript from last week, highlighted in bright neon yellow. Question: Have you ever fabricated any of the abuse allegations? Answer: I would never lie about something so traumatic. Every word is true. Question: Do you plan to take an active operational role in Caldwell Logistics? Answer: I plan to act as a silent partner. I want the company to thrive. Question: Have you had any communications with Apex Logistics? Answer: No. I have never spoken to anyone at Apex Logistics. Are we ready? Diane asked, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. I have been ready for 2 years, I replied, folding my hands on the mahogany table. Marcus swaggered into the courtroom a moment later, followed closely by his attorney, Richard. Marcus looked like a man who had already won the lottery. He was wearing a custom charcoal suit, his hair perfectly lined up, the gold Rolex gleaming on his wrist. He turned to the gallery, flashed them a tragic but brave smile, and then took his seat across the aisle. He didn't even bother to look at me. In his mind, I was already a ghost. All rise, the bailiff boomed. Judge Harrison entered the courtroom. He was a stern, no-nonsense jurist in his late 50s, known for his absolute intolerance of courtroom theatrics. He took his seat at the bench, adjusted his reading glasses, and opened the massive file sitting before him. "We are here for final orders in the matter of Vance versus Vance," Judge Harrison began, his voice gravelly and exhausted. "I have reviewed the financial affidavits, the deposition transcripts submitted by both parties, and the petition for asset division. Mr. Vance's counsel, you have motioned for a 50% division of Caldwell Logistics, permanent spousal support, and exclusive possession of the Buckhead estate, citing severe financial and emotional abuse." "That is correct, Your Honor," Richard said, standing up and puffing out his chest. "As the deposition transcripts clearly show, my client endured years of systemic manipulation. He was entirely isolated. Ms. Vance froze him out of his own life. The 50% stake in the business he helped build is the bare minimum required for restitution. We move for immediate judgment." Marcus looked down at his hands, playing the role of the battered survivor to absolute perfection. A woman in the gallery actually sniffled. "Very well," Judge Harrison sighed, picking up his pen. He turned his gaze to our table. "Counselor, the plaintiff's defense thus far has been lacking in documentary evidence to refute these abuse claims. Unless you have a miraculous closing argument, I am prepared to rule." Diane stood up. She smoothed the front of her jacket, picked up a single sealed manila envelope with a bright red tamper-evident sticker, and stepped out from behind the plaintiff's table. "Your Honor," Diane said, her voice ringing clear and sharp through the courtroom. "The plaintiff does not have a closing argument. The plaintiff has a piece of emergency whistleblower evidence that was submitted directly to your chambers this morning under seal. We are requesting it be admitted immediately under the crime-fraud exception to the Georgia Wiretap Act." The courtroom went dead silent. Marcus's head snapped up, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. Richard, his lawyer, practically leaped out of his chair. "Objection!" Richard bellowed, his face flushing red. "Your Honor, discovery concluded weeks ago. What is this? We have not been privy to any late submissions. This is trial by ambush." Judge Harrison ignored him. He looked at the sealed envelope Diane had handed to the bailiff, who then passed it up to the bench. The judge sliced it open with a silver letter opener and pulled out a small encrypted digital audio drive. "Counselor," Judge Harrison said, his eyes narrowing at Richard. "This drive was accompanied by a sworn affidavit from a third-party, non-investigatory source. The affidavit claims that this drive contains explicit, unedited audio of your client detailing a conspiracy to commit perjury, malicious prosecution, and corporate fraud. If those claims are true, it overrides any discovery deadline." Marcus visibly stopped breathing. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving an ashen, sickly gray in its wake. He slowly turned his head to look at me. For the first time in 2 years, the arrogant smirk was gone. In its place was stark, naked terror. "Your Honor, you cannot play unauthenticated audio in this courtroom." Richard panicked, realizing his client was suddenly acting incredibly guilty. "I can, and I will," Judge Harrison growled. "I have already reviewed the transcript in my chambers. Now you are going to listen." Judge Harrison plugged the drive directly into the court's audio system and pressed play. The ambient noise of the private Buckhead veranda filled the courtroom. The clinking glasses, the jazz music, and then Marcus's voice boomed through the speakers. "I'm telling you, it's a lock. She has absolutely no idea." I watched the people in the gallery. The women who had abandoned me froze, their eyes darting toward Marcus in shock. "I filed an affidavit claiming severe financial and emotional abuse. I painted her as a complete tyrant. In family court, whoever controls the narrative controls the assets. The judge is already treating her like a hostile witness." Judge Harrison's face turned into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He leaned forward over the bench, staring daggers at Marcus, who was now gripping the edge of his table so hard his knuckles were entirely white. "When the judge finally awards me my 50% stake, I've already got a handshake agreement with the CEO of Apex Logistics. I'm dumping my 50% to them the second the ink dries. They force a hostile takeover, absorb her feet, and I walk away with $8 million in cash. The recording continued, playing every single vile, malicious sentence Marcus had spoken. It played Chloe's giggling. It played his admission that he just wanted to bankrupt me for fun to teach me my place. When the recording finally clicked off, the silence in the courtroom was so profound it felt like a vacuum. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning vents. You could hear Marcus's ragged, shallow breathing. Judge Harrison didn't speak immediately. He slowly picked up the highlighted deposition transcript Diane had provided him. He looked at the transcript. Then he looked at Marcus. "Mr. Vance," Judge Harrison said. His voice wasn't loud. It was deadly quiet, which was infinitely more terrifying. "Last week you sat in a deposition. You swore an oath to God, or were asked on the record if you fabricated the abuse allegations. You said, and I quote, 'I would never lie about something so traumatic. Every word is true.'" Marcus opened his mouth. His jaw trembled. No sound came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on a dock. He looked at his lawyer, desperately pleading for a lifeline. But Richard wasn't looking at him. Richard was staring at the table, completely stunned, realizing his client had just used him to orchestrate a massive criminal fraud. "You were asked if you had any communications with Apex Logistics," Judge Harrison continued relentlessly. "You swore under oath that you had not. Yet, on this recording, you explicitly detail a backdoor handshake agreement to commit a hostile corporate takeover to intentionally bankrupt your wife." "Your Honor, Marcus choked out, his voice cracking. "That audio, it's taken out of context. I was drinking. I was just talking big in front of some investors. It wasn't real." "Do not insult my intelligence in my own courtroom," Judge Harrison suddenly roared, slamming his hand down flat on the bench. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot. The people in the gallery jumped. "You sat in my court for months playing the victim. You utilized the judicial system, a system designed to protect actual victims of domestic abuse, as a weapon for your own personal financial terrorism." Richard stood up, his face pale, his professional demeanor entirely shattered. "Your Honor, I need a 10-minute recess. I need to confer with my client regarding my continued representation in this matter. I was entirely unaware." "Sit down, counselor," Judge Harrison barked. "There will be no recess because we are not finished." Diane stood up. She wasn't smiling. She looked like an executioner holding an axe. "Your Honor," Diane said smoothly, cutting through the tension, "if we are adjusting the timeline of evidence based on the plaintiff's sudden revelation of mass perjury, the defense would like to present the findings from the forensic accounting team we quietly hired 3 months ago." Marcus's head snapped toward Diane. If he looked terrified before, he looked physically ill now. Diane pulled a massive 3-inch thick binder from her briefcase and dropped it onto the table with a heavy thud. She walked a copy up to the bench and dropped another copy directly in front of a horrified Richard. "While Mr. Vance was claiming he was a destitute victim of my client's financial control," Diane explained, her voice ringing with authority, "our accountants tracked his actual spending. Mr. Vance has systematically drained over $400,000 from the joint marital accounts over the last 2 years. He funneled this money through shell LLCs registered under the name of his current girlfriend, Chloe." Diane turned to look directly at Marcus. He failed to report any of these offshore accounts on his sworn financial affidavits. He used my client's corporate revenue to fund private jet leases, international vacations, and high-end luxury goods, all while intentionally driving my client's company into high-interest debt to devalue her assets for his hostile takeover. For the next hour, it was an absolute bloodbath. Diane laid out bank statements, hidden wire transfers, undisclosed crypto wallets, and epilogues showing Marcus moving money from my accounts to Chloe's while I was sleeping. She proved mathematically and undeniably that Marcus was a financial predator. Judge Harrison spent nearly 45 minutes reviewing the mountains of evidence. The courtroom remained entirely silent. Marcus sat slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the polished wood table. The gallery of friends who had come to watch me fall were completely speechless. Some of them looked sick. When Judge Harrison finally looked up from the binder, his decision was swift, brutal, and absolute. "Marcus Vance," the judge began, gripping his gavel tightly. "In my 25 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a case of such malicious, calculated, and arrogant fraud. You did not just lie to your wife, you lied to this court. You committed perjury on a massive scale." Marcus buried his face in his hands, letting out a choked, ragged sob. "All allegations of abuse against Miss Vance are hereby dismissed with prejudice," Judge Harrison declared, his voice booming. "Your demands for alimony, spousal support, and property division are denied in their entirety. The Buckhead estate is awarded solely to the plaintiff. The hidden assets discovered today will be immediately seized and fully awarded to the plaintiff as restitution for the revenue you intentionally destroyed." I closed my eyes, letting the words wash over me. The crushing weight that had sat on my chest for 2 years finally evaporated. "Furthermore," the judge continued relentlessly, "severe financial sanctions are imposed upon you. You are ordered to pay 100% of Miss Vance's legal fees, which, given the complexity of the forensic accounting required due to your fraud, will be astronomical, and your request for any ownership stake in Caldwell Logistics is rejected completely. You will not see a single share." Marcus was openly weeping now, his broad shoulders shaking. It wasn't the fake, manipulative crying he had used on our friends. It was the pathetic, broken sobbing of a man who realized his life was over. "Finally," Judge Harrison said, his eyes narrowing into cold slits, "I am unsealing the audio recording and forwarding a full copy of today's transcript, the whistleblower audio, and the forensic accounting binder directly to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. I am formally recommending they pursue felony charges of perjury and criminal fraud against you." The judge slammed his gavel down. "Court is adjourned." Marcus had walked into that courtroom expecting to walk out an $8 million millionaire. He walked out a criminal, completely broke, utterly disgraced, and owing me a massive fortune in legal fees. I didn't stay to watch him cry. I didn't gloat. I simply picked up my briefcase, thanked Diane, and walked down the center aisle. As I passed the gallery, the friends who had betrayed me refused to meet my eyes. I walked out the heavy oak doors, stepped out into the humid Atlanta afternoon, and breathed in the fresh air for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. But the universe wasn't finished with Marcus Vance. 3 months later, the reality of Marcus's financial ruin set in. Chloe, the woman who had mocked me on Instagram, the woman who thought she had secured a wealthy king, didn't stay to hold his hand through the struggle. The absolute second she realized the offshore accounts were frozen, the private jets were grounded, and the money was gone, she packed her designer bags and left him in the middle of the night. She didn't even leave a note. Another 6 months later, the situation turned from bad to catastrophic. Because Marcus had gotten sloppy, mixing his fraudulent marital funds with Chloe's legitimate influencer income to hide the money, federal investigators got involved. The IRS opened aggressive audits into both of them, triggering a federal nightmare that stripped Marcus of whatever tiny shreds of dignity he had left. His luxury lifestyle vanished completely. Unable to pay rent, unable to secure a job in commercial real estate because his reputation in Atlanta was completely destroyed, he was forced to move out of the city entirely. He moved back into his mother's basement in a cramped suburb outside of Macon, Georgia. Meanwhile, my life exploded in the opposite direction. With the truth public and my name legally and completely cleared, the smear campaign evaporated overnight. Caldwell Logistics didn't just recover, it skyrocketed. The clients who had pulled their contracts due to the rumors returned, offering deeply apologetic renegotiations and larger multi-year deals. Apex Logistics, terrified of being implicated in Marcus's conspiracy, publicly distanced themselves and abandoned their aggressive expansion into my territory. I poured every ounce of my energy, my pain, and my newly freed capital back into the empire I had built. 2 years after the divorce was finalized, a massive global supply chain corporation out of Chicago offered to buy a minority stake in my business. The valuation was staggering. The deal we struck made me financially free for the rest of my life, allowing me to step back from the 18-hour workdays and finally enjoy the wealth I had bled for. Last winter, I was sitting on the sprawling balcony of my new penthouse overlooking the glittering Atlanta skyline, drinking a cup of coffee. I opened my laptop and checked my filtered emails. There was a message sitting in the spam folder from an email address I hadn't seen in years. It was from Marcus. I hovered the cursor over it, curious. I opened the email. There was no apology in the text. There were no excuses. There was no accountability for the sheer hell he had put me through, the lies he had told, or the business he had tried to destroy. There was just one single pathetic sentence typed in the body of the email. I never thought you'd actually end up winning. I stared at the message for a long time. I listened to the sound of the city humming below me, my city. I thought about the cramped apartment in Decatur where I started. I thought about the betrayal, the suffocating fear, the cold courtroom, and the agonizing climb back to the top of the mountain. Then I smiled and I hit delete. Because the greatest revenge in the world isn't getting even. It isn't screaming or fighting in the mud or destroying the people who hurt you. The absolute greatest revenge is succeeding wildly, living beautifully, and thriving beyond measure after someone tried their absolute hardest to bury you. The man who spent years meticulously planning my downfall lost everything he had in a single afternoon, and the recording he never knew existed became the exact reason why. You would think that after completely dismantling the man who tried to destroy me in family court, I would have thrown a massive party. You would think I would have popped expensive champagne, invited everyone who doubted me, and rubbed my victory in their faces. But trauma doesn't work like that, and neither does building an empire. The morning after Judge Harrison handed down his ruling, I didn't celebrate. I woke up at 4:30 a.m., tied my hair back into a sleek bun, put on a simple black turtleneck and slacks, and drove straight to the Caldwell Logistics Dispatch Center. I walked onto the warehouse floor, smelling the familiar, comforting scent of diesel fuel, hot asphalt, and strong coffee. My fleet managers, who had spent the last 6 months terrified they were going to lose their jobs to an apex takeover, actually clapped when I walked into the break room. I just smiled, poured myself a cup of black coffee, and got back to work. I thought the war was over. I thought the family court ruling was the final chapter of Marcus Vance, but I had underestimated the sheer destructive momentum of the United States federal government. When Judge Harrison promised he was sending the whistleblower audio and Diane's forensic accounting binder to the Fulton County District Attorney, he wasn't making an empty threat. He expedited it, and what began as a messy high-asset divorce rapidly mutated into a massive federal criminal investigation. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, I received a phone call from an assistant district attorney named Robert Gaines. He asked me to come down to his office. When I sat across from Gaines in his cramped, paper-filled office in downtown Atlanta, he didn't mince words. "Miss Vance," Gaines said, leaning back in his chair and adjusting his tie, "your ex-husband was incredibly arrogant, but he was also incredibly sloppy. When he siphoned $400,000 out of your corporate and joint accounts, he didn't just hide it under a mattress. He routed it across state lines into 3 separate shell LLCs that were legally registered in the name of his girlfriend, Chloe." "I know," I said calmly. "My attorney proved that in civil court." "Yes, but your attorney was only looking for the money," Gaines replied, a sharp glint in his eye. "We were looking for the crime, because Marcus moved that money across state lines to defraud you during an active litigation. It triggered wire fraud statutes. And because he and Chloe used those stolen funds to pay off the leases on their luxury vehicles and fund international flights, they mixed stolen corporate revenue with her legitimate social media income." I felt a slow, dark smile spreading across my face. "They committed money laundering?" "Exactly," Gaines nodded. "The IRS Criminal Investigation Division has been quietly auditing them for the last 6 weeks. We are preparing to unseal a multi-count felony indictment. But we need your full cooperation. We need you to testify before a grand jury regarding the exact timeline of the unauthorized transfers." "Mr. Gaines," I said, leaning forward and resting my hands on his desk, "I'll give you whatever you need. Bank logs, IP addresses, sworn testimony. Tell me where to be." What followed over the next 4 months was a masterclass in watching two narcissists completely turn on each other the absolute second their survival was threatened. Marcus and Chloe's relationship had always been built on a foundation of shallow luxury and mutual delusion. She thought she was securing a multi-millionaire who would fund her soft life influencer aesthetic forever. He thought he was buying the ultimate submissive trophy to prove to Atlanta that he had upgraded from his intimidating corporate wife. The moment the money stopped, the illusion shattered. But the moment the FBI knocked on their door, it turned violent. I heard the details later from Diane, who still had deep connections in the DA's office. Early one Tuesday morning, federal agents executed a search warrant at the luxury high-rise apartment. Marcus and Chloe were renting an apartment. Marcus was already 3 months behind on. They seized laptops, hard drives, banking documents, and every single designer handbag Chloe had bought using my stolen money. Chloe panicked. She was a 25-year-old Instagram model who had never faced a consequence heavier than a suspended social media account. Staring down a potential 10-year federal sentence for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering, she folded like a cheap lawn chair. She didn't even wait for Marcus to hire a defense attorney. Within 48 hours of the raid, Chloe walked into the U.S. Attorney's office with a public defender and begged for a plea deal. She turned state's evidence. She handed over every text message Marcus had ever sent her bragging about the stolen money. She handed over the passwords to the encrypted offshore accounts. She explicitly detailed how Marcus had coached her to lie on the LLC and corporation documents to hide the assets from the family court judge. She threw him completely to the wolves to save her own skin. But Chloe's desperation didn't end there. She realized that even with immunity from federal prison, her life in Atlanta was completely destroyed. Her influencer brand was toxic. No wealthy man in the city would touch her, especially not after Julian Hayes. The billionaire she had originally tried to play quietly blacklisted her from every high-end venue, restaurant, and country club in the metropolitan area. In a move of staggering, unbelievable audacity, Chloe actually tried to call me. I was sitting in my office one afternoon reviewing a new distribution contract for the Midwest routes I had successfully won back, when my private line rang. I answered it without looking at the caller ID. "Maya Vance," I said. "Maya? Oh my God, please don't hang up," a frantic, breathy voice pleaded. I froze. I recognized that voice instantly from the background of Julian's secret audio recording. It was Chloe. "How did you get this number?" I asked, my voice dropping to a glacial chill. "I begged Diane's paralegal," Chloe sobbed. It sounded genuine, raw, and pathetic. "Maya, please, you have to listen to me. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what Marcus was really doing. He manipulated me. He told me you were this horrible, abusive monster who was stealing his money. He made me register those LLCs. I was just a victim of his lies, too." I leaned back in my leather chair, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. I listened to her hyperventilate on the other end of the line. "You're a victim?" I asked softly. "Yes, he ruined my life. The FBI took everything I have. I can't even pay my rent this month, Maya. I know you got the estate back and I know your company's doing great. I'm just asking for a little grace. If you could just talk to the DA, tell them I was manipulated." "Chloe," I interrupted, my tone so sharp it made her gasp and fall silent. "I heard the audio tape. I heard you giggling on Julian Hayes' veranda while Marcus detailed exactly how he was going to bankrupt me and destroy my company. You weren't a victim. You were an active, enthusiastic participant. You enjoyed watching him try to ruin me because it made you feel powerful." "Maya, please, I was drunk. I was just playing along." "You made your bed," I said, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "Now you get to lie in it. And if you ever contact my office, my attorneys, or my person again, I will have you arrested for aggravated harassment. Have a beautiful life." I hung up the phone and blocked the number. I never heard from her again. I later learned she had to move back to Ohio to live in her sister's spare bedroom, working a minimum-wage retail job because her digital footprint was too radioactive for any corporate employer to hire her. Marcus, however, could not run to Ohio. Marcus was trapped. With Chloe testifying against him, this secret recording from Julian Hayes authenticated, and the massive paper trail my forensic accountants had built, Marcus's criminal defense was non-existent. The high-priced criminal defense attorneys he tried to consult with all demanded massive six-figure retainers up front. Retainers he couldn't pay because Judge Harrison had legally stripped him of every dime he possessed to pay my restitution. The man who had worn Tom Ford's suits and flashed a gold Rolex at his deposition was forced to use a court-appointed public defender. The criminal trial didn't even make it to a jury. It was a bloodbath during the preliminary hearings. His public defender, a perpetually exhausted man carrying a mountain of case files, took one look at the DA's mountain of evidence and advised Marcus to take a blind plea to the judge, begging for mercy. I was subpoenaed to give a victim impact statement at his sentencing hearing. It was a cold, rainy morning in November when I walked into the federal courthouse. This courtroom felt completely different from the family court. It was darker, heavier. There was no gallery full of gossiping socialites. There were only federal marshals, grim-faced attorneys, and the crushing weight of the United States Penal Code. I took my seat in the front row. A few minutes later, the side door opened and the marshals brought Marcus in. The physical transformation was jarring. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit. He was wearing an oversized, bright orange county jail jumpsuit. His wrists and ankles were shackled with heavy steel chains that clinked loudly against the linoleum floor as he shuffled toward the defense table. His hair was unkempt. The smooth, arrogant beard he used to meticulously groom was overgrown and patchy. He had lost at least 20 pounds, his face gaunt and pale from spending the last 3 months in holding because he couldn't post bail. He looked up and saw me sitting in the gallery. He didn't glare. He didn't smirk. He looked away instantly, his shoulders hunching forward as if he was trying to physically shrink himself until he disappeared. He looked exactly like what he had always been underneath the suits and the charisma, a weak, terrified coward. The federal judge, a woman named Honorable Davis, took the bench. She reviewed the plea agreement. "Mr. Vance," Judge Davis said, her voice echoing in the quiet room, "you have pled guilty to 1 count of perjury, 2 counts of wire fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit financial fraud. The sheer entitlement demonstrated in this case is staggering. You weaponized the judicial system to execute a vindictive, calculated attack on your former spouse's livelihood." Judge Davis turned to me. "Miss Vance, does the victim wish to address the court before sentencing?" I stood up. I didn't walk to the podium. I simply stood at my seat, looking directly at the back of Marcus's head. "Your Honor," I said clearly, my voice steady. "For 2 years, Marcus Vance tried to convince the world that I was a tyrant. He tried to sell my company to my rivals. He tried to leave me with nothing but debt and a destroyed reputation, but I do not want to stand here today and speak about my pain, because frankly, he is no longer worth my emotional energy." Marcus flinched at the words. "I rebuilt my empire," I continued. "My company is more successful today than it ever was while I was married to him. I am here simply to ask the court to ensure that he can never use his charm, his lies, or his manipulation to financially and emotionally destroy another woman ever again. Thank you." I sat down. I didn't need to scream or cry. My absolute indifference was the most painful weapon I could have used. Judge Davis nodded approvingly. She looked back at Marcus. "Marcus Vance," Judge Davis declared, "I sentence you to 60 months in a federal penitentiary to be followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are ordered to pay complete restitution to the IRS and to Caldwell Logistics. Officers, remand the prisoner." 60 months, 5 years in federal lockup. The marshals grabbed Marcus by his arms. As they turned him to walk him back through the side door, he looked at me one last time. There were tears streaming down his gaunt face, mixing with the dirt on his cheeks. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to finally say the words, "I'm sorry," as if an apology now would somehow magically undo the hell he had put me through. I didn't give him the satisfaction of hearing it. I simply turned my back, picked up my coat, and walked out of the courtroom before he could speak. That was the last time I ever saw Marcus Vance in person. The years that followed were a testament to the sheer power of refusing to break. Caldwell Logistics didn't just survive the apex rumors, we dominated the market. After the Chicago merger, I used my newly acquired capital to launch a mentorship program for young African American women entering the freight and logistics industry. I bought a sprawling, massive estate in a private gated community. I traveled the world, not on fraudulent credit cards but on the cash I had bled and sweat to earn. I found a peace so profound that the memory of Marcus eventually felt like nothing more than a bad movie I had watched a long time ago. So when that pathetic single-sentence email from him arrived in my spam folder last winter, I never thought you'd actually end up winning. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the need to reply with a lengthy paragraph detailing my success. He sent that email from a halfway house, typing it on a monitored computer, wearing cheap clothes, completely stripped of the wealth and status he had tried to steal from me. He wanted a reaction. He wanted to know that he still occupied space in my mind. Hitting delete was the most liberating feeling in the world. Sometimes the universe doesn't just give you justice. Sometimes it lets you watch the very trap your enemies dug for you become their own permanent grave. And that is a victory no one can ever take away.